The story we are about to unravel begins with Winston Smith, a 39-year-old man whose body already bears the weight of his existence with a varicose ulcer above his right ankle. It is a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks strike 13, an unusual hour that already introduces us to the dislocation of his reality. Winston slips through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, his residence, a place that, from the lobby, gives off the smell of boiled cabbage and old rag mats, a rancid aroma that permeates the decay of his existence. On every landing of his ascent to a seventh floor, an image haunts him, a colored poster, too large for an indoor poster, with a huge face more than a meter wide. It is the face of a man of about 45, with a large black mustache and handsome and hardened features. The eyes of this face follow Winston wherever he goes, and at the bottom, a few words proclaim an inescapable truth. Big Brother is watching you. This visual omnipresence of the Supreme Leader is just the tip of the iceberg of an unprecedented surveillance system. This slogan, along with others on coins and other objects, establishes a constant vigilance where the eyes of Big Brother pursue you even from the coins. Awake or asleep, working or eating, at home or on the street, in the bathroom or in bed, there was no escape. Inside his apartment, an oblong metal plaque, a kind of dulled mirror on the wall, known as a telescreen, spews a full voice that recites a list of numbers that had something to do with the production of iron ingots. Winston can turn down the volume of the telescreen, but not silence it completely. This instrument, called a Totalitarian, not only transmits, but also receives simultaneously. Any sound Winston made that was louder than a whisper was picked up by the apparatus. Furthermore, as long as he remained within the radius of vision of the metal plaque, he could be seen as well as heard. The uncertainty is the true weapon. There was no way of knowing whether you were being watched at a given moment. This constant vigilance turns life into an act of instinct, a survival under the premise that any sound you emitted would be recorded and heard by someone, and that, except in the dark, all your movements would be observed. The thought police is the entity in charge of this surveillance, and Winston knows they are the real threat. Winston, in his blue overalls, the party uniform, his hair very blonde, a sanguine face and skin roughened by bad soap, blunt razor blades, and the cold, contemplates London from his window. The city, the main city of Airstrip 1, which was in turn the third most populated of the provinces of Oceania, is a somber landscape of dilapidated 19th century houses, bomb sites, and squalid colonies of wooden shacks. Winston's difficulty in remembering if London had always been like this, the fog of his childhood, is the first indication of the mutability of the past, a central concept in this dystopia. He can barely reconstruct his own life, because beyond the 50s, everything vanishes, and without external data of any kind to refer to it, was impossible to reconstruct even the outline of one's own life. Even the names of countries and their shapes on the map have changed. Airstrip 1, for example, was formerly called England, or Britain. Above this desolate landscape rises, a kilometer away, the Ministry of Truth, where Winston works. It is a huge pyramidal structure of white and glistening reinforced concrete, which stands terrace after terrace, about 300 meters high. On its white facade, the three slogans of the party are read in elegantly shaped letters. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. These slogans, which defy logic and reason, are the pillar of the ideology known as INGSOC, English Socialism. The four ministries that govern Oceania are monuments to this double standard. The Ministry of Truth, Miniver, is dedicated to news, entertainment, education, and the fine arts. The Ministry of Peace, Minipax, to matters of war. The Ministry of Love, Minimore, in charge of maintaining law and order. And the Ministry of Plenty, Minindantia, which is responsible for economic matters. Their names in Newspeak already hint at the inversion of reality that the party imposes. Winston's day, full of restrictions and scarcity, like the victory gin, which smelled of medicine, and the lack of provisions in his kitchen, leads him to an act of intimate rebellion, the opening of his diary. The book, of soft, creamy paper, a little yellowed by the passage of time, is a precious object in a world where such luxuries of the past have disappeared. Winston supposed the book was many more years old than the 40 the paper seemed to be, and he had seen it in the window of a second-hand shop in a miserable neighborhood of the city. Buying the book was a risky act, a transaction in the free market forbidden for party members, but necessary to acquire objects impossible to get otherwise. Writing in the diary is not illegal. In fact, nothing was illegal since there were no laws. But Winston knows that if he is discovered, the sentence is death, or at least 25 years of forced labor. Winston, a man of almost 40, is no longer used to writing by hand. The pen is an archaic instrument in an era of speak scribes. The date, April 4th, 1984, is uncertain for him, since anyone knows what year he lives in today. His purpose in writing is for the future, for those who had not yet been born. However, the magnitude of his act is revealed with the word doublespeak, which describes the inability to communicate with an uncertain future. In a panic impulse, Winston begins to write with disordered speed. He recounts an experience at the Flicks cinema, where war films show the bombing of refugees and the massacre of a very, very fat man and children in a lifeboat. The audience, except for a prole woman who raised a terrible fuss, screaming that they shouldn't show that, they shouldn't show it in front of the kids, was dying of laughter. This incident underscores the brutalization and insensitivity of society, as well as the party's indifference to the proles. No one cares what the proles say. That same morning at the ministry, Winston experiences the 2 minutes hate. This daily ritual is a controlled explosion of fury, a collective catharsis directed by the party. The face of Emmanuel Goldstein, the enemy of the people, appears on the telescreen. Goldstein is the renegade, the figure of the traitor par excellence, who had stained the purity of the party, and from whose teachings came all subsequent crimes against the party. His Jewish face, thin with a halo of white hair and a goatee with glasses, is described as intelligent but despicable and with senile foolishness. The spectators let out uncontrollable exclamations of rage. Winston has heard rumors that Goldstein is in some enemy place, on the payroll of his foreign masters, or even hidden somewhere in Oceania itself. Goldstein, whose real existence is a rumor, is the supreme leader of the Brotherhood, an immense army that acted in the shadows, an underground network of conspirators who intended to overthrow the state. It is also rumored that there is a terrible book, a compendium of all heresies, authored by him, which circulated clandestinely and was simply referred to as the book. During the hate, Goldstein venomously attacked the doctrines of the party, insulted Big Brother, accused the party of dictatorship, and called for peace with Eurasia, advocating for freedom of speech, press, assembly, and thought. His accusations are so exaggerated and perverse that even a child could realize that his accusations didn't hold up. A paradox of mind control. The horrible thing about the ritual is not that everyone had to play a part in it, but that it was absolutely impossible to avoid participation, an ecstasy of fear and revenge, A desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces with a hammer takes hold of the crowd, turning it into gesticulating and vociferous madmen. Winston himself discovers himself hysterically screaming like the others. In a moment of lucidity, his hatred is directed against Big Brother himself, against the party, and against the thought police. And his heart is on the side of the lonely and insulted heretic on the screen, the only guardian of truth and sanity in a world of lies. But the next instant, doublespeak drags him away. He identifies completely with the people around him, and it seemed to him that everything they said about Goldstein was true. His hatred transforms into adoration for Big Brother, who rises like an invincible tower. After Goldstein's face fades, Big Brother appears, with his black hair and his big black mustaches, a face brimming with power and mysterious calm, and so big that it almost filled the screen. His voice instills confidence by the simple fact of being spoken. Then, the three slogans of the party appear. The people chant a rhythmic song. B, 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 B. BB exclamation mark, a procedure of self-hypnosis, a deliberate way of drowning consciousness through a rhythmic noise. Winston joins the chorus since it is mandatory. In this frenzy, Winston crosses glances with O'Brien, a member of the inner party with a coarse, brutal, and yet good-humored face. Winston is attracted to him, with a secret conviction that O'Brien's political orthodoxy was not perfect. In that fleeting fraction of a second, an unmistakable message is exchanged between them. "I'm with you," O'Brien seems to say. This ephemeral connection sows in Winston the hope that he is not alone in his unorthodoxy, the belief that O'Brien shares his thoughts and his disgust. Driven by gin and the ecstasy of the hate, Winston returns to his diary and writes repeatedly in large capital letters, "Down with Big Brother." This act, the thought crime, cannot be hidden for long. Winston knows that the thought police would discover it anyway, and that he had committed and would have continued to have committed even if he had not put pen to paper the essential crime that contained all the others. Arrests happen invariably at night, and individuals simply disappear, their names erased from everywhere, their passage through life totally annulled as if it had never existed. This process is called vaporized. Winston knows he has committed the essential crime and that his vaporization is inevitable. He writes in bad handwriting, "They will kill me, I don't care, they will kill me. They will shoot me in the back of the head, I don't care. Down with Big Brother. They always kill you in the back of the head. I don't care. Down with Big Brother." The visit of Mrs. Parsons, his neighbor, interrupts Winston's solitary act of rebellion. Mrs. Parsons, a woman of about 30 who looks older and with dried dust in the wrinkles of her face, lives a terrifying life with her children, who are horrible. The party has systematically indoctrinated children through organizations like the Bainai Spies, turning them into ungovernable little savages. This savagery, however, did not drive them to rebel against the party's discipline, but rather they adored it. Their ferocity is directed outward, against the enemies of the state, against foreigners, traitors, saboteurs, and thought criminals. It was almost normal for people over 30 to have a visceral fear of their children, since hardly a week went by without the Times publishing a few lines describing how some little viper, the official denomination was heroic child, had denounced their parents to the thought police by telling them what they had heard at home. The parson's son, only 9 years old, has tried to shoot Winston with a toy automatic pistol, shouting, "Goldstein!" He calls him a traitor, a thought criminal, a Eurasian spy, and threatens to kill and vaporize him. The girl, about 7 years old, does the same with a piece of wood. Parsons himself, Winston's colleague at the Ministry of Truth, is a very fat man, but active and astonishingly stupid, a mass of imbecile enthusiasms. One of those idiots on whom, even more than on the thought police, the stability of the party depended. He is proud that his daughter has denounced a man to the patrols for wearing some very strange shoes, believing he was an enemy agent. The family in this regime has become an extension of the thought police. The Parsons children even complain about not being able to go see those Eurasian prisoners hanged, a popular spectacle that happened once a month. Winston's work in the records department of the Ministry of Truth, Miniver, is the most direct manifestation of the party's control over reality. His task is to rectify history, adjusting the past so that it always coincides with the current party narrative. Every day, Winston receives small paper cylinders with orders to modify reports, speeches, and statistics. These documents are then discarded in the memory holes, oblong slits that send the paper to enormous hidden ovens to be destroyed. Examples of his work are revealing. A speech by Big Brother that predicted a calm battlefront in southern India, but the Eurasian offensive broke out in North Africa, must be rewritten so that Big Brother predicts what really happened. Economic forecasts about the consumption of products that turned out to be dead wrong must be adjusted so that the original figures match the later ones, always showing an increase in production. The Ministry of Plenty's promise not to reduce the chocolate ration in 1984 must be changed to a warning that the ration would probably have to be reduced, even though Winston knows the ration will be reduced from 30 to 20 grams that same week. This process of continuous alteration is not applied only to newspapers, but to books, magazines, pamphlets, posters, programs, films, soundtracks, children's comics, photographs. That is, to all kinds of documentation or literature that could have some political or ideological meaning. Daily and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. In this way, all the predictions made by the party turned out to be correct according to documentary proof. All history becomes a palimpsest, scraped and rewritten as often as necessary. The existence of a falsification is impossible to prove. The most curious thing, Winston thinks, is that it was not even a falsification in the traditional sense, but a substitution of one kind of nonsense for another. The statistics are as fantastic in their original version as in the rectified one. Reality dissolves into a world of shadows in which even the date of the year was uncertain. Winston, despite everything, stands out in this art of falsification. One of his most delicate tasks is to create the unperson. For example, a prominent member of the inner party, Comrade Withers, has fallen into disgrace and been vaporized. Winston must rewrite a speech by Big Brother that praised Withers. Instead of simply eliminating Withers, Winston invents a Comrade Ogilvy, a fictional hero whose life and death exemplify the principles of INGSOC. He enlists in the spies at 6, denounces his uncle at 11, invents a grenade that kills 31 Eurasian prisoners, and dies heroically at 23. Ogilvy, who an hour ago did not exist, was already a fact. This process demonstrates that men could be created and not living men, and that once the falsification is forgotten, the new version will continue to exist with the same authenticity, with evidence of the same strength as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. The Ministry of Truth, with its enormous complexity, includes sections for the falsification of photographs, teleprogram studies with actors specially chosen for their ability to imitate voices, and entire sections dedicated to literature for the proles, producing sensationalist novels, films that oozed sex and sentimental songs composed by exclusively mechanical means in a kind of kaleidoscope called a versificator. There is even a section called Pornosec, in charge of producing low-class pornography for the proles. This pornography was considered an illegal commodity, even though it was produced by the party, giving a false sense of subversion to young proletarians. In the middle of his lunch in the canteen, Winston meets Syme, a philosopher specializing in Newspeak who works in the research department. Syme, a man intellectually of a poisonous orthodoxy, is an enthusiast of the destruction of words. His work on the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary does not consist of inventing new words, but of destroying words, hundreds of words every day. His goal is to prune the language to the bone. Syme explains with a kind of pedantic passion the beauty of the destruction of words. He argues that if the word good exists, there is no need for bad. Ungood serves exactly the same, even better. To reinforce good, words like excellent or splendid are useless. Plus good or double plus good are enough. The idea, of course, was Big Brother's. The true purpose of Newspeak is to limit the scope of thought, to narrow the range of action of the mind. The goal is to make all thought crime impossible. If every concept is expressed clearly with a single word, a word whose meaning is rigorously decided and with all its secondary meanings eliminated and forgotten forever, how could heretical thought exist? Syme predicts that every year there will be fewer words and the range of action of consciousness will be smaller and smaller. The revolution will be complete when the language is perfect. Newspeak is Ingsoc, and Ingsoc is Newspeak. The orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing thought. Our orthodoxy is unconsciousness. The proles, according to Syme, are not human beings, and by the year 2050, all the literature of the past will have been destroyed. Works like those of Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron will only exist in Newspeak versions, not only transformed into something very different, but converted into the opposite of what they were. Even the party's slogans will change, since the concept of freedom does not exist. Newspeak is a language whose vocabulary decreases every day. The grammar of Newspeak is notable for the almost total interchangeability between the different parts of speech. Any word can be used as a verb, noun, adjective, or adverb. The word thought, for example, does not exist, being replaced by think. Adjectives are formed by adding the suffix dash, dash full, and adverbs with dash dash wise. Example, speedful for speed, speedwise for quickly. Negation is achieved with the prefix un. Example, uncold for hot. And emphasis with plus or double plus. Vocabulary B, specifically, is composed of words that had been deliberately constructed for political purposes. These compound words, such as good think, orthodoxy, crime think, thought crime, and pol think, thought police, are designed to impose a desirable mental attitude. The abbreviation of names of organizations, Miniver, Ficdep, Teledep, is not just for convenience, but to narrow and subtly alter their meaning, losing most of the associations of ideas that they would otherwise have maintained. The example of Communist International versus Comintern illustrates how the abbreviation eliminates multifaceted images and ideological complexity. Newspeak is obsessed with euphony and speed of pronunciation, favoring short, unequivocal words that arouse the minimum of suggestions in the speaker's mind. The ultimate goal is an articulated language that arises from the larynx without involving the brain centers at all. The word duck speak, which means quacking like a duck, is ambivalent. An insult for opponents, a compliment for the orthodox who fire the correct opinions as automatically as a machine gun fires bullets. Winston, with a chilling premonition, feels the deep conviction that one of these days Syme would be vaporized. He is too intelligent, sees everything too clearly, and speaks with too much simplicity. The party does not like intelligence if it's self-aware. Orthodoxy was unconsciousness. Life in Oceania is an existence of privation and discipline. Members of the outer party, like Winston, receive only 3,000 clothing coupons for the year, and a pair of pajamas needed 600 coupons. The day begins at 7:15 with a whistle from the telescreen, the time to get up for office workers. 3 minutes later, the physical jerks begin, a mandatory gymnastics session led by an instructor on the telescreen. Winston suffers from coughing fits and the pain of his varicose veins as he mechanically performs the exercises, forcing himself to maintain the expression of contentment that was considered appropriate. During these sessions, Winston reflects on the malleability of the past, a past that had not only been altered but was being destroyed. He knows that he who controls the past, said the party slogan, controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. This is called control of reality, or in Newspeak, doublespeak. Doublespeak is one of the most refined subtleties of the system, to know and not to know, to be conscious of what is really true while telling carefully crafted lies, to simultaneously hold two opinions knowing that they are contradictory and yet to believe in both, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while resorting to it. It involves consciously inducing unconsciousness and then becoming unconscious so as not to recognize that an act of autosuggestion has been performed. Even understanding the word doublespeak implies the use of doublespeak. Winston struggles to remember the past. He cannot be sure when he first heard Big Brother, but the party's history books present him as the leader of the revolution from its beginnings. With feats that go back to the 40s and 30s, he suspects that all the history books were a pure fantasy. He remembers airplanes from his childhood despite the party claiming to have invented them. Only once in his life did he have the undeniable documentary proof of the falsification of a historical fact. Years ago, in the period of the Great Purges, towards the 60s and something, the primitive leaders of the revolution were eliminated. 3 of the last survivors, Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, were arrested around 1965, disappeared, and then reappeared to confess crimes of treason and sabotage, being pardoned and returned to honorary positions before being vaporized again. Winston saw them once at the Chestnut Tree Cafe, feeling a terrified fascination. He remembered that Rutherford was a famous cartoonist. One day while working, Winston found a piece of the Times from 10 years earlier with a photograph of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford at a party event in New York. This photo contradicted their confessions of being in Eurasia on that date, proving that the confessions were a lie. Winston had destroyed the proof, but he understood that the party had persuaded people that simple impulses and feelings were useless, and that whatever happened to you vanished, and neither you nor your actions would ever again appear. Deep down, Winston wonders if he is not crazy for believing that the past is unalterable, being a minority of one. The party announces that 2 and 2 are 5, and you have to believe it. Its philosophy denies not only the validity of experience, but that external reality existed. The greatest of heresies is common sense. The most terrible thing is not that they will kill him for thinking differently, but that they might be right. What if the past and the external world only exist in our mind? And, since the mind is controllable, the past and what we call reality can also be controlled. However, O'Brien's face for some reason floats in his memory again, reaffirming the belief that O'Brien was on his side. Winston knows that if there is hope, it is in the proles. The proles, who constitute 85% of Oceania's population, could destroy the party tomorrow morning if they were aware of their own strength. The party, on the other hand, believes that the proles are not human beings, and that they are naturally inferior and must be kept well subject, like animals. They live in squalid colonies of wooden shacks, and their lives are summed up as: they were born, grew up in the gutter, started working at 12, went through a brief period of beauty and sexual desire, got married at 20, started to age at 30, and almost all of them died around 60. The party does not bother to indoctrinate them politically, contenting itself with a primitive patriotism and concentrating their discontent on trivialities of everyday life. The telescreens do not watch them for the most part, and they are allowed a certain freedom in morality, including promiscuity and divorce. As the party says, proles and animals are free. Winston, exploring the streets of the proles, observes their raw reality and their distraction with the lottery, the only public event to which the proles paid serious attention. The prizes, however, were for the most part imaginary. He tries to talk to an elderly prole to ask him if life before the revolution was better. The old man, however, only remembers trivial anecdotes and cannot offer a coherent vision of the past. This inability of the proles to connect the past and the present, to have a consciousness of their strength, is what keeps them submissive. One day, Winston meets the dark-haired girl from the fiction department. During a chance encounter, she slips a small folded paper into his hand. Winston suspects it could be a trap by the thought police, but a crazy hope that it is from a clandestine organization, from the Brotherhood, floods him. When he unfolds the paper, he reads the words, "I love you." This unexpected message leaves him stunned and instills in him a desire to continue living. From that moment on, Winston and the girl, whose name is Julia, begin a clandestine relationship. Their first love meeting takes place in a magnificent hideout that Julia discovered on a collective excursion, far from the telescreens. Julia is a 27-year-old woman with a bold appearance, with thick black hair, a freckled face, and quick athletic movements. Winston had hated her at first, believing she was a party fanatic or even a thought police agent. But Julia is, in fact, a rebel, although in a different way than Winston imagines. Julia has a cynical and pragmatic attitude towards the party. She hates the party and says so with the most terrible swear words. But she was not capable of making a serious criticism of what the party represented. For her, life is very simple. You wanted to have a good time. They, that is the party, tried to prevent it by all means, and you tried to circumvent the prohibitions as best you could. She believes it's stupid to think of an organized uprising against the party, since it is invincible and will always exist. Her method of rebellion is personal. If you observed the small rules, you could break the big ones. For example, she joined the Junior Anti-Sex League, marching and shouting slogans, using this camouflage for her own freedom. Julia has had several clandestine relationships, always with party members, and the more men you have had, the more I love you, Winston tells her, celebrating her corruption as a blow to the party. Julia has no interest in theory or history. When Winston talks to her about the mutability of the past or the falsification of documents, she is not impressed. She asks Winston, "Were they friends of yours? And what's the point of that? What good does it do you to know it?" Winston realizes that Julia is a rebel more from the waist down. She did not fully understand the enormity of what was required of them, nor was she interested enough in public events to realize what was happening. By lack of understanding, they were all politically sane and faithful. Through Julia, Winston understands the true purpose of the party's sexual puritanism. Sexual repression led to hysteria, which was desirable since it could be transformed into a war fever and adoration of the leader. Sex, if done for pleasure, expends energy and makes people feel happy and carefree, which the party cannot tolerate. They want people to be on the verge of exploding with energy all the time, channeling that soured sex into marching up and down, cheering and waving flags. The family has also been co-opted. Although people are encouraged to love their children, they are systematically pitted against their parents and taught to spy on them and denounce their deviations. The family has become an extension of the thought police. Winston and Julia rent a small room above Mr. Charrington's antique shop. This room becomes their refuge, a complete world, a bag of the past where animals of extinct species could circulate. It is a place without a telescreen, where they can feel a lost intimacy. Julia brings delicacies from the black market to the room, such as chocolate and tea. Winston and Julia enjoy a temporary freedom, living in the present without thinking about the consequences. Winston recovers physically. He had gained weight. His varicose veins no longer bothered him. In fact, they had almost disappeared, and in the mornings, he no longer coughed when he woke up. In this refuge, Winston relives memories of his mother, a noble figure who loved him unconditionally and sacrificed herself out of loyalty, something that could not happen now in a world of fear, hatred, and physical pain. Julia, however, does not value these private feelings, considering them ineffective. For Winston, the proles, unlike the party members, continued with their feelings and emotions. They had not hardened inside. He comes to the conclusion that the proles are human beings, while we, on the other hand, are not human. Winston and Julia discuss the inevitable moment of their capture. Julia believes that the thought police cannot force you to stop loving someone, that they can never enter inside you. Winston shares this hope. They can't penetrate our soul. If we can feel that it is worthwhile to continue being human, even if this has no positive result, we will have defeated them. One day, O'Brien approaches Winston at the ministry and extends a veiled invitation to pick up the 10th edition of the Newspeak dictionary at his apartment. Winston knows that this is the beginning of a process that will lead him to the ministry of love, but he has already accepted it. The hope that O'Brien was an enemy of the party, that the Brotherhood existed, remained alive. Upon arriving at O'Brien's apartment, Winston and Julia find themselves in an environment of luxury and comfort unknown to outer party members. Carpets, good food, and excellent tobacco. Servants. The telescreen can be turned off. An amazing fact. O'Brien serves them wine, a drink from the romantic and vanished past. Winston, in an act of surrender, confesses his hostility towards the party, his thought crime, and his adultery, putting himself at the mercy of O'Brien. O'Brien confirms that the Brotherhood is a reality, not an invention of the thought police. He makes them swear allegiance and asks if they are willing to do anything to undermine the party. Give your lives. Commit murders. Sabotage that can cause the death of hundreds of innocent people. Sell your country? Cheat, falsify, blackmail, corrupt children, distribute drugs, foster prostitution, spread venereal diseases, do everything that can cause demoralization and weaken the power of the party. The only thing Winston refuses to do is throw sulfuric acid in a child's face. O'Brien also warns them that the Brotherhood operates in the dark, without mutual recognition among its members, and that if they are captured, they will confess. "We are the dead," O'Brien says. "Their only true life is in the future." He promises Winston Goldstein's book, which O'Brien himself has written or collaborated in its writing. Goldstein's book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, reveals the true structure and purposes of the party. It explains that society has always been divided into three classes: the high, the middle, and the low. The high want to keep their power, the middle seek to displace the high, and the low, or proles, seek equality, although they never achieve it. History is a cycle of overthrow and new tyranny, but the new totalitarian movements of the 20th century, such as ING-SOC, neo-Bolshevism, and death worship, have as their conscious purpose the perpetuation of the lack of freedom and social inequality. For the first time in history, the elite has developed a system to preserve its position permanently. This is possible thanks to technology, such as the telescreen, which allows for constant surveillance and complete uniformity of opinion. The inner party, unlike the oligarchies of the past, is not hereditary, but perpetuates itself by the persistence of a certain way of seeing the world and a certain way of life imposed by the dead on the living. The book explains the true purpose of war. The three superstates, Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia, have been in a permanent war for 25 years. This war is not a struggle for annihilation since the forces are too balanced. The war is a sham, a constant conflict for limited objectives without a clear material or ideological cause. Its main purpose is to consume the surplus of goods and help preserve the mental atmosphere essential for a hierarchical society. War is a way of pulverizing or sinking to the bottom of the sea the materials that, in constant peace, could be used for the masses to enjoy excessive comfort, and, with it, become too intelligent in the long run. By maintaining a chronic shortage, the party increases the importance of small privileges, making the distinction between classes more evident. War not only makes the necessary distinction, but does so in a psychologically acceptable way. It creates an essential mental atmosphere of fear and hatred that reinforces the party's control. It doesn't matter whether there is a war or not. The only thing needed is that a state of war exists. This is especially important for the inner party, where the Vusam see war, the war hysteria and the hatred of the enemy are more intense. War is a matter of internal policy, and the object of war is not to conquer territory or to defend it, but to maintain the structure of society intact. In fact, a peace that was truly permanent would be the same as a permanent war, which explains the slogan, "War is peace." Scientific and technical progress only exists when its products can be used to decrease human freedom. The two purposes of the party are to conquer the entire surface of the earth and to extinguish once and for all the possibility of all freedom of thought. Scientists are dedicated to discovering, against the will of the interested party, what a certain human being is thinking and how to suppress, in a few seconds and without prior notice, several 100 million people. They research more deadly gases or poisons that can be produced in such immense quantities that they destroy the vegetation of an entire continent, or cultivate germs immunized against all possible antibiotics, or even produce artificial earthquakes using the heat from the center of the earth. Despite these investigations, the art of war has remained stagnant for 30 or 40 years. The atomic bombs, which appeared in the 40s and were used in the 50s to convince the rulers of all countries that a few more bombs would end organized society, have not been used again. The plan of the superstates is to acquire, through a combination, a ring of bases that completely surrounds one of the rival states, to then sign a pact of friendship with that rival, and continue in peaceful relations with him for as long as it takes for them to trust each other. However, this plan is a pipe dream of impossible realization. The main borders can never be crossed except by bombs. If citizens were allowed contact with foreigners, they would discover that they are creatures essentially the same as him, and that almost everything he has been told about them is a pack of lies. This would thus break the closed world in which he lives, and perhaps the fear, hatred, and fanatical rigidity on which his morality is based would disappear. The three ideologies Ingsoc, neo-Bolshevism, and death worship are almost the same, with the same pyramidal structure, identical worship of a semi-divine leader, the same economy oriented towards a continuous war. Hence, Not only can the three superstates not conquer each other, but they would have no advantage if they did. On the contrary, they help each other by keeping themselves in conflict. The leaders know that war must be eternal, without a definitive victory, and this makes possible the systematic denial of reality, the main characteristic of INGSOC. The book explains that continuous war has fundamentally changed its character. In the past, war was a guarantee of sanity and a safer break for the ruling classes, forcing them to be well informed of what had happened in previous eras. But now, when a war becomes continuous, it ceases to be dangerous because all military necessity disappears. Technical progress can cease, and the most palpable facts can be denied or dismissed as unimportant things. Reality only exerts its pressure on the needs of daily life, the need to eat and drink, to dress and have a roof, not to drink poisons or fall out of windows, etc. The rulers can twist and deform reality, giving it the shape they want. On the 6th day of Hate Week, in the midst of a great patriotic frenzy against Eurasia, it is suddenly announced that Oceania is not at war with Eurasia, but with Eastasia, and that Eurasia is its ally. Winston witnesses it at a rally, where an inter-party speaker changes his speech mid-sentence, without flinching. The crowd, enraged, destroys the wrong banners and flags, attributing the sabotage to Goldstein's agents. At that moment, a stranger hands Winston a briefcase. Winston knows it contains Goldstein's book. The work at the Ministry of Truth to rectify all of history is crushing, with 18-hour shifts. Winston realizes that historical falsification is a feat that no human being could ever mention, and that it was impossible for any human being to prove with documents that the war with Eurasia had happened. With the book in his hands, Winston reads about the mutability of the past, the axis of Ingsoc. The party maintains that past events have no objective existence, but survive only in documents and in the memories of men. By controlling the documents and the minds of its members, the party decides what the past is. The daily falsification of the past, carried out by the Ministry of Truth, is as essential for the stability of the regime as the repression and espionage carried out by the Ministry of Love. This mutability is necessary to safeguard the infallibility of the party, and for the party member to believe that their living conditions are better than those of their ancestors. Doublespeak is key, allowing the party intellectuals to know that he is faking reality. But at the same time, he satisfies himself through the exercise of doublespeak in the sense that reality is not violated. It is a conscious and unconscious process at the same time, which the party has been able to and will continue to be able to for thousands of years to stop the course of history. Syme had disappeared. One morning, he did not show up for work, and on the third day, his name had been removed from the chess committee list. Syme had ceased to exist. What's more, he had never existed. Winston has the premonition that he himself will be vaporized, along with Julia, Mrs. Parsons, and Syme. But Parsons, on the other hand, they would never vaporize, nor the individual with the glasses and the quack, a party speaker. Winston believes that Syme was vaporized because he was too intelligent. He knows by intuition who would perish, although it was not easy to determine what allowed a person to survive. The most gifted of the proles who could form a nucleus of discontent are filed by the thought police and eliminated. The secret room in Charrington's shop offers Winston and Julia a few months of intimacy. Winston's varicose veins almost disappear. He gains weight, and he no longer coughs in the mornings. Life no longer seems intolerable to him. However, at a crucial moment, the washerwoman in the courtyard, with her body deformed by childbirth and hardened, roughened by work, who sings tirelessly, makes him reflect. Winston sees her as a beautiful woman, and Julia agrees on her style of beauty. Winston realizes that the future belonged to the proles. He believes that in the future, the world would have to change because the proles were immortal, and until that happened, even if it took 1,000 years, they would survive, despite all obstacles like the birds. The secret was to pass on to each other the secret doctrine that 2 and 2 are 4. Winston and Julia say to each other, "We are the dead," and suddenly an iron voice replies, "You are the dead." The picture on the wall, under which they thought they were safe, falls, revealing a telescreen. They had been discovered. The house is surrounded by men in black uniforms. Julia is beaten and dragged outside. Winston is left alone, feeling Julia's pain as his own. Mr. Charrington, the owner of the shop, enters. His Cockney accent has disappeared. His hair has turned black. He no longer wears glasses, and his face is the alert and cold one of a man of about 35. Winston understands that Charrington is a member of the Thought Police. Winston is taken to the Ministry of Love, a place without clocks or natural light, where time becomes impossible to calculate. He is first thrown into a common cell, full of ordinary criminals and some political prisoners. The common criminals are noisy, irreverent, and seem to have a certain tolerance from the guards. They are even given positions of trust in forced labor camps. The political prisoners, on the other hand, are always quiet and full of terror. Winston observes the difference in behavior and perceives the contempt of the common criminals towards the Pollets. Room 101 is mentioned in whispers, a place of terrible fear. Parsons, Winston's stupid colleague, is also taken to the cell. He confesses to having shouted, "Down with Big Brother," in his sleep. He was denounced by his own 7-year-old daughter, of whom he is proud for her political loyalty. The fear of Room 101 is palpable. A man with a rodent face is threatened with being taken there, and he writhes, offering his wife and children to torture instead. He tries to betray others, shouting that the telescreen was not working properly, and he did not hear the others' heresies. Winston is tortured. The beatings are a slight introduction to what will come. They hit him with fists, clubs, steel rods, and boots all over his body, forcing him to confess a long series of crimes, espionage, sabotage, and things like that. He screams for mercy, confessing true or imaginary crimes. Then come more subtle interrogations, led by party intellectuals with shiny glasses. They humiliate him, twist his ears, pull his hair, deny him permission to urinate, shine reflectors on his face until he cries. He becomes a doll, signing and affirming everything they ask of him. He confesses to having murdered his wife despite knowing that she is alive, and to having been a spy for Eastasia, a member of the Brotherhood. In the eyes of the party, there was no distinction between thoughts and actions. Finally, O'Brien himself becomes Winston's interrogator, in a room where the telescreen has been muffled. O'Brien reveals himself to be part of the system, and that the conversation they had years ago, that secret conviction that O'Brien was his accomplice, was a trap. O'Brien controls a dial that inflicts pain on Winston, showing him that he can make him scream at the time and to the degree he wants. He tells Winston that he is mentally ill, that he suffers from a defective memory, and that he is preferred to be a madman, a minority of one. Reality, according to O'Brien, is not external. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else, not in the individual mind, which can make mistakes. Only the mind of the party, which is collective and immortal, can grasp reality. What the party holds to be true is indeed true. O'Brien shows him 4 fingers and asks Winston how many he sees. Despite the pain, Winston insists that he sees 4. The torturer's needle goes up to 60. Finally, Winston gives in and screams, 5, 5, 5. but O'Brien tells him he is lying, that he still believes they are 4. Winston experiences mental confusion and unbearable pain, coming to see countless fingers. O'Brien tells him that it is possible to see 5 fingers, and Winston achieves it for an instant, experiencing a luminous certainty where 2 and 2 could have been the same 3 as 5, depending on what was needed. O'Brien reveals to Winston that they have not brought him there to punish him or for him to confess, but to cure you, to make you sane. The party does not destroy its enemies, but we change them. Their goal is to make the brain they are going to destroy perfect. The slogan of the old despotisms was, "You shall not do this or that." That of the totalitarians, "You shall do this or that." But the party's order is, "You are." They have brainwashed even figures like Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, until there was nothing left in them but regret for what they had done and love for Big Brother. O'Brien tells Winston that his supposed evidence of the innocence of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford was a legend that he invented and ended up believing in it. Winston asks about Julia, and O'Brien tells him that she betrayed you, immediately and without reservations. Julia became a case to put in the textbooks. Her rebellion, her deceptions, her mental dirt, all that has disappeared from her, as if it had been burned. O'Brien also reveals that he wrote or collaborated in the writing of Goldstein's book, and that the program he presents is nonsense, because the proletarians will not rise up in 1,000 years or 1,000,000,000 years. They can't. The real reason for the party's power is power for power's sake. We are not interested in the welfare of others. We are only interested in power. Power is not a means, but an end in itself. A dictatorship is not established to safeguard a revolution. The revolution is made to establish a dictatorship. The object of persecution is nothing more than persecution itself. Torture only has torture itself as its purpose, and the object of power is nothing more than power. O'Brien states that the party is immortal, that the individual is only a cell. Power is power over human beings, over the body, but especially over the spirit. O'Brien tells Winston that we control matter because we control the mind. Reality is inside the skull. The party dictates the laws of nature. The way to assert power over another is by making him suffer. Power lies in inflicting pain and humiliation. Power is in the ability to break spirits into pieces and rebuild them, giving them new forms chosen by you. The future that the party is creating is a world of fear, of ration, and of torment. A world of trampling and being trampled. A world that will become more and more ruthless every day. The progress of our world will be the achievement of more pain. The old civilizations claimed to be based on love or justice. Ours is founded on hatred. All emotions will be suppressed except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. There will be no loyalty, no love except for Big Brother. There will be no laughter, art, literature, science, or distinction between beauty and ugliness. But always don't forget it, Winston. There will always be the desire for power, the thirst for dominion, which will constantly increase and become more and more subtle. There will always be the emotion of victory, the sensation of trampling on a helpless enemy. If you want to get an idea of what the future will be like, imagine a boot, crushing a human face, incessantly. Winston, despite everything, insists that the party will not be able to create such a world, that it would not last, that life will defeat you. O'Brien replies that we, Winston, control life at all its levels. You imagine that something called human nature exists, which will be irritated by what we do and will turn against us. But don't forget that we create human nature. Men are infinitely malleable. Winston declares himself the last man, that his species has become extinct. O'Brien plays him a tape of the night Winston enlisted in the Brotherhood, hearing himself promising to commit all kinds of crimes. Winston sees his emaciated body, gray as if covered with an old layer of dust, with scars and inflamed varicose veins, the cavity of his ribs as narrow as that of a skeleton. He has lost 25 kilos. O'Brien pulls out a tooth, saying, "You are rotting, Winston. You're falling apart. What are you now? A bag full of filth. Look at yourself in the mirror again. Do you see that in front of you? It's the last man. If you are human, that is humanity." Winston cries out of pity for his body. O'Brien tells him that he himself became that rag by standing against the party, that all of it was already contained in that first act of rebellion. Winston has betrayed everyone, and there is no degradation into which he has not fallen. He has not stopped loving Julia, in the sense that his feelings are still the same, but O'Brien understands that this is irrelevant. Winston recovers physically in a new cell. His varicose veins are healed, and he is given a denture. He has capitulated, realizing the superficiality and frivolity of his attempt to confront the party. He recognizes that the party is right, and that sanity was a matter of statistics. He accepts the slogans and the falsifications of the past, knowing that to surrender and the rest would come by itself. He trains in Crime Stop, the faculty of stopping, of cutting off in a snap, in an almost instinctive way, all dangerous thought. This process had to be automatic, instinctive. The arithmetic problems of 2 and 2 are 5 require an athletic mentality, a stupidity as precise as intelligence. One day, Winston wakes up shouting, "Julia! Julia! Julia! My love!" He had had a hallucination of her presence and had loved her more than ever. This outburst of emotion, however, condemns him again. He knows that O'Brien will understand it and that he will have to start the indoctrination process all over again. He realizes that the best way to hide a secret is to hide it from yourself. His new goal is to feel and even dream with rectitude, enclosing his hatred like a cyst. He longs for the moment of his death, wishing to die hating them so that his brain is not shattered before they can consider it theirs. To die hating the party, that was freedom. O'Brien returns to the cell. He tells him that Winston has thought of deceiving me. He tells him that he is improving, that intellectually you are almost all well, but that you only fail emotionally. He asks him what his true feelings are towards Big Brother. Winston replies, "I hate him." O'Brien tells him that the time has come to apply the last means. You have to love Big Brother. It is not enough to obey him. You have to love him. Winston is taken to room 101. On the table there is an elongated cage with rats. O'Brien tells him that the worst thing in the world is rats for Winston. The rats are carnivorous. They attack children in poor neighborhoods, the sick and the dying. The cage is designed to fit his head, and by pressing a spring, these creatures, mad with hunger, will pounce on you like bullets. They attack the eyes, make their way through the cheeks, and devour the tongue. Winston feels an overwhelming panic. The disgusting smell of rats hits him. In his desperation, an idea arises. There was only one way to save himself. He had to interpose another human being, the body of another human being between the rats and him. And he begins to scream frantically over and over again, "Do it to Julia! To Julia, not me! To Julia, not me!" Sometime later, Winston sits in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, the same cafe where he saw Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford. He plays chess and drinks gin, now without the telescreen giving him warnings. The whites always win in chess, he thinks with a confused mysticism. He meets Julia. Both confess to having betrayed each other in room 101. Julia explains to him that, faced with the threat of unbearable torment, one truly wishes, and one wishes that they would do it to the other person. You only care about yourself then. After that, you can no longer feel the same way about the other person as before. They have nothing more to say to each other. Winston sees her leave, and for a moment he thinks of accompanying her, but the desire to return to the warmth of the cafe and his gin is stronger. They part ways. Winston knows that when that happens, you really want it, and that he had wanted it. He sits in the cafe, drinking gin, which is his life, his death, and his resurrection. He works a little at the Ministry of Truth on a subcommittee for the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary, discussing trivialities. Suddenly, a trumpet announces a victory. Winston looks at the portrait of Big Brother. It had taken him 40 years to understand what kind of smile was hidden under the black mustache. But now, everything was already settled. Everything was perfect. The struggle was over. He had defeated himself definitively. He loved Big Brother. His torture has ended, his mind has been rewritten, and the last resistance has been broken. Big Brother has won.